Art fairs don't begin and end in the first few hours any longer, and they haven't for some time. It really takes the totality of a week. It takes several weeks after that for business to close. That is also to some degree a reflection of how the trade is evolving.
I'm Katya Kazakina, and this is The Art Angle. This week, the art world descends on Basel, a Swiss city on the Rhine River where the latest edition of the world's most important modern and contemporary art fair is taking place. I'm talking about Art Basel, of course. Its 290 exhibitors include all the top galleries of the world. It's a place where you can see and buy museum-quality Picassos and Warhols next to still wet paint by emerging artists, though not as many of those lately. Major collectors like Don and Mera Rubell are there, and so are celebrities like Kanye West and James Franco. At the center of it all is Noah Horowitz, Art Basel CEO since 2022. Noah and I have known each other for years. I was an art market reporter, and he ran various art fairs, starting with the first online art fair called VIP in 2010. In 2011, he became the executive director of the Armory Show in New York and remained in that role for almost 4 years, until 2015. He then advanced to Art Basel, becoming its head of the Americas, which put him in charge of Art Basel Miami Beach, the largest contemporary art fair in the United States. In 2021, Sotheby's hired Noah to lead its gallery and private dealer services worldwide. But he stayed for just a year before returning to Art Basel triumphantly as its chief executive. Noah is also the author of Art of the Deal, Contemporary Art in a Global Financial Market, a book that was published in 2011. For many years, Art Basel ran 3 art fairs, the original one in Basel, second one in Miami Beach, and a third one in Hong Kong. But in the last couple of years, it added a 4th fair in Paris, and just this year, another one in Qatar, raising questions about expansion, model, and sustainability. It also introduced a new platform, 010, for digital art, and the Art Basel Awards. Noah and I discussed the changing art market, digital art, and the strain art fairs place on mid-tier galleries. Noah?
Hey, Katya.
Hi, welcome to the Art Angle. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. I wanted to ask you, where are you actually?
I'm in New York. I fly out to Basel tomorrow evening.
So your marathon starts tomorrow.
Officially, yes.
And we should tell our listeners that we are speaking less than a week until the opening of Art Basel. I know you're here in New York, you haven't seen the floor yet, but what are you most excited about for this year's edition of Art Basel?
Well, first of all, as ever, Basel holds a special place in our heart and our universe of things. Also, for me, and I think the industry, it really is the event that's the event to end all events in our industry. I think there's great anticipation this year. We're clearly coming out of a challenging cycle of the last few years. We'll talk more, I'm sure, about that. Also, the May season here in New York. But there's a lot of extraordinary things happening that have been lined up this year, in addition to the extraordinary museum shows, of which there are a number we've introduced this year. Basel exclusive, which we're really excited about. We can talk about that in terms of working with the gallery community to hold back some really special works that can only be seen on site at the fair. This is the first year that Ruba Katri will be curating Unlimited, which we're really excited about as well. Ruba is a New Yorker, as you know, and at PS1, and been involved with Greater New York. She's opened a great fanfare here earlier this spring. Steffi Hessler, several years now into parkour, which we're really excited about.
Another New Yorker.
Another New Yorker. And then we're also inaugurating 010, co-curated by Eli Scheinman, who we've worked with since the inauguration of 010 in Miami Beach last December. But co-curated with Trevor Paglen, a fantastic artist, also based here in New York, lived in Berlin for many years, also spent a lot of time in the Bay Area. So there's a lot of new elements to the fair this year, but of course, a big part of the focus and the driving force of Art Basel, especially Art Basel and Basel, is what happens in the main halls themselves and the 290 galleries from over 40 countries that'll be with us, with over 20 new galleries that will be showing with us for the first time this year. So really across all sectors of the fair, from early modern masters to new voices from the US, Europe, and globally, there's an extraordinary amount of amazing art on view from a lot of different positions and artists from all over the world. So we're, as ever, thrilled to host the art world at this critical moment mid-June.
It's definitely a be must-see event for the trade and for collectors. We will touch on some of the things that you've outlined later. But I want to ask you specifically for the market, do you think there is a direct relationship between a strong auction season in May in New York and strong results in Basel in June?
So I think there is a relationship, but I also think that one of the reasons, and we talk about this internally, that Basel in June, also for many years running Miami Beach in December, have established themselves as such strong fairs is they also come a few weeks after these major auction and market moments. So I think that's really important structurally because it allows audiences and the market to show up with a real sense of where the market is at a moment in time. Collectors that have acquired things or in other instances sold things either have money to deploy or redeploy back into the market, but there's a real sense of aligned pricing. There's an updated and renewed sense of what collectors are interested in and what's performing and what's perhaps little softer. And I do think that that's one of the reasons that the Basel Fair for over 50 years now, but also, the Miami moment at the end of the year have established themselves as such fixtures within our industry at a global level. The market shows up, they're aligned, they're focused, and, especially on the back of, what was a strong season in New York in May, I think, there's renewed confidence, focus, and anticipation heading into the fair this year, notwithstanding, of course, the Venice Biennial, which historically has also been an important draw and magnetic moment to draw audiences, curators, collectors, and those through Basel in June and then off to Venice either before or after.
See in Venice, buy in Basel, right? As they say.
You betcha.
I love how you guys outlined like a whole section so conveniently of so many artists that are showing in Venice. You have them listed one by one on your website. It was very useful for an art journalist for sure. But let me ask you more specifically, let's get a little bit more granular here. Last year, coming out of Basel, it kind of opened the floodgates of just bad news for galleries. Tim Blum closed, and then it just was on and on and on and on. Just tough, very, very tough stretch. Hopefully, it will be much stronger. Basel, obviously, but the emerging segment of the market is still hasn't recovered. The results in May, all the headlines were about the tippy top of the market. We're talking about the biggest masterpieces, the Newhouse collection, Bob Newton's collection, Goodman, all of those works, many segments, lots of niches, and you have some of them on the trade floor. So I'm curious about how, you're seeing this dynamic between emerging market that's still not out of the contraction fully and the top of the market that seems to have, again, like disconnected from the rest and is just soaring into the stratosphere. Like, what are we going to see in Basel? What are you hearing from your exhibitors, from collectors? Is there hesitation on the emerging art front? A lot of emerging galleries are also invested and into exhibiting people who've been overlooked, who have history behind them. Everybody's adjusting. I think some people are trying different models, but the trajectory was very, very tough. So what are you hearing from your exhibitors and collectors? Like, how are people positioning themselves for this upcoming edition of Art Basel?
There are some noteworthy galleries clearly that have closed. I think the industry itself is going through a lot of growing pains that are well discussed. Cost pressures are real. The cost of moving art around the world, insuring, shipping, and so on and so forth is real. At the same time, we see some of these highlights coming through, especially at the high end of the market. I think there's going to be a lot of anticipation and expectation, around the fair next week coming through the gallery community. There's a lot of people certainly on pins and needles. And I've talked to a number of clients here in New York just in the last week, gauging interest and lining up sales already leading into the fair week. And I think that there's a lot of anticipation. The details going to be read in actual fact next week when we're on the ground in Basel. There's a number of new voices, I said, coming in. I think we're seeing an uptick in confirmations, which is reassuring in terms of people re-engaging, coming back to the fair. Again, I think the Venice moment plays into that. Perversely, I think not having a marquee artists representing the U.S. in the U.S. Pavilion is also to some degree beneficial for the Basel Show Week.
How so?
Well, we're seeing renewed interest, certainly from some folks in this part of the market that maybe didn't feel, the urgent pressures to necessarily go to the opening week of Venice about a month ago and are now sort of scheduling and programming and coordinating their visits with align with Basel in June.
Right. So you're saying people are timing their visit to Basel around Venice because they didn't feel the necessity to come to the opening.
I think that that's correct.
Somebody told me just this week was like, the story to do would be like, who is coming from America? Because so many people are not coming. Is that what you hear?
That's been the discussion for several years now. That's not in itself new.
Paris is so shining and wonderful, and everybody wants to be in Paris.
Well, they're different, but they're interrelated, and I've been saying this for some time now. And, I've had a number of interesting conversations, as has Vincenzo, who leads the Flair platform, as have our directors and VIP team. And we are also hearing in parallel, which is very interesting, Paris is enigmatic. Let's be very clear. In many ways, there's no greater city to look at, celebrate art. There's no greater building in many ways to look at art.
I would say Rome.
There are many, but Paris is certainly one of them.
Definitely.
But having said that, there are differences too. And it's a much more boutique fair. The city has a huge amount on offer, repeat visitations, how you get people in audiences and collectors in a fair environment, which is ultimately what we produce and what we're responsible to deliver on for our clients. Paris is a different dynamic. And after several years as well, we're also hearing, which is interesting, from some very serious advisors, collectors, like desire of them, their clients, of coming back to Basel again to really have that connoisseur type experience. Several days in Switzerland, surrounded by art community and people that only want to talk about art, what they've seen in the halls, what great exhibitions they've seen. They're comparing notes over breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that experience is really, really important. It's fundamental to business happening. And the other thing that we can also say is true is that Basel, Switzerland is very unique in its ability to deliver that in a totally purified way.
There's no better art trading floor. How it's set up, the floor, the private rooms, the whole structure is very conducive to trade.
Yeah. And so I think coming out of a challenging cycle of several years now with clear and very real challenges and high cost pressure, I think that there's also a green shoot around that experience, around the purity and uniqueness and substantivity of that thing. And I think we're hearing and seeing that as well. But the proof will be in the pudding. And we're speaking ahead of the fair. We can talk in another week and go through and see what we hear on the halls of the floor. The other thing as well that I'd say, for several years now, art fairs don't begin and end in the first few hours any longer. And they haven't for some time. It really takes the totality of a week. It takes several weeks after that for business to close. That is also to some degree a reflection of how the trade is evolving.
It's so fascinating. Yeah. I think it's very important to acknowledge that change, right? Because I feel like it's been a couple of years at least. It's really significant, right? In how galleries are approaching the sales, just like for the morale. For years and years and years of my coverage, it was the first few hours and we would be standing there and counting all these sales, right? Like you said, it's no longer the cadence. And so I think it's just an important thing to just acknowledge that there is change that. And then another thing that I thought was interesting, just This time around, you've rolled out this new exclusive. And it's so funny in a sense that we need this structure, right? You need to impose this structure for galleries not to send everything out in PDFs and not to pre-sell everything. That in itself is also like a huge change in how things used to be. I mean, we know each other for almost 20 years. So I feel like we've seen a lot of changes, but it's like we're going back to something that was very fundamental 15 years ago, right? And now you have to impose it again as a structural change.
So I think there's a few things here. So I'd say two things. One, we continuously think, rethink, adjust, fine tune our platform on a day to day. With 5 fairs now and a number of new initiatives as well that happen during, at, and around those fairs, we have the ability to constantly have our ear to the ground, speak with clients, see what's working, and adjust things in real time. Before directly touching on Basel exclusive, I'd roll back to last summer as well, where we started looking at the Paris Fair coming out of this challenging summer and taking a more proactive role also in addressing a fundamental challenge in that fair, which is that, there's this extraordinary demand, but the venue itself is appreciably smaller in terms of the size. And so we inaugurated Avant Premiere, which was the first cut of invitations that we really worked hand in hand with the galleries to self-nominate clients. And I say that by way of example, because across the fair platform, as we look at how to adjust all the dials to where the market is, we are refining the way that we have done things historically. We're listening to our clients and we're trying to respond and adapt our platform to meet the needs of galleries, but also professional audiences, serious collecting audiences, and a lot of the new audiences that are coming to the Art Basel platform. So Avant Premiere was one, I think, ultimately very successful step in that direction in the fall. And when we started then looking at, as the Basel cycle unfolded at the end of last year and into this year, what else we could do with our flagship fair in Switzerland, in speaking to committee members and speaking to gallerists and speaking to our clients, one thing is also becoming true is that there's already a trend that was happening organically within which a number of galleries were holding back truly extraordinary work from their previews and telling their clients that they're only going to bring this, that, or the other work onto their booth at the fair in Switzerland, especially. There are some secondary dealers doing this, but also primary or hybrid dealers. And a number of our key clients were finding success talking about the impact that this had in their conversations with clients of theirs and how they felt that was creating further traction and engagement. And so, while for a number of years now we've looked at what we can do with this, because it's a two-way street. As the industry and as the business has professionalized, galleries, as they participate more and more fairs, started de-risking by pre-selling and pre-offering. And at some stage, we've gotten to where we are now, where there's a normed pattern of how galleries promote their offering. And to some degree, it's impacted or created a degree of urgency alignment around the fair, where certain professionals, certain clients, certain end users feel that there's perhaps less urgency to show up on site because they already know what gallery ate.
No bull rush.
Well, these things all sort of play into each other.
They do. Why show up, right? Like, why do you need to go if everything is delivered to you on a PDF? Like, there's no urgency to go.
There's plenty of reason within that. But Basel exclusive was a way to recapture that. So it's really about building on what was happening already, but then doing it with a degree of specificity and intentionality to say, hey, you're showing in the fair. You do not have to do this, by the way. But a number of your colleagues are doing this or similar already. And, are you interested in withholding a work or a body of work and partaking? And it exceeded any reasonable expectation that we had set. Around 190 galleries in Basel next week are going to participate. And it's really exciting. And I think you're going to see a variety of things. You're going to see some extraordinary masterpiece, secondary market offerings. You're going to see certain artists that are highly in demand, exceptional new paintings or new sculptures by those artists that the galleries will pop out. But our hope is that, that this will create, a degree of discovery, excitement, chatter in the period leading up to. And I've certainly talked to many people that are, at dinners and whatnot, all asking each other what they're bringing, kind of constantly listening and refining. But hopefully it also creates a sense of discovery at the fair, where on the opening day and the days to follow, people are really churning through the fair trying to find these extraordinary objects, in addition to the normal ways that they've patterned navigating the halls of the show.
I'm also very interested in talking about 010 because it's like a whole new segment which premiered in Miami. And it was really the talk of the fair. It was the most unexpected, surprising, provocative section. People talked about it. It really went viral with Beeple's robotic dogs running around with heads of Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and Beeple and Picasso and Warhol. And there was a lot more there. People sold a lot. It was, I think, very successful from my interviews and from other news reports. But there was really like a great sense of like, whoa, what is it? So weird, so new, really feels like it's a window into another community, another ecosystem that feels different from kind of more traditional art market ecosystem. This is the third iteration. You guys have done it also in Hong Kong, and now you're introducing it in Basel. I would say Miami audience is very different from Art Basel. I was thinking about this 010 and how it would actually fit within Art Basel culturally. The list of participants who are doing it took me by surprise because it was House and Worth, Marion Goodman, Elmin Rash, some of the biggest galleries in the world. It's clearly evolving. I don't know if it's a pivot or evolution. If you can tell us a little bit about what's happening there.
In its essence, 010 is a new global initiative dedicated to art of the digital era, trying to put a hand on a circuit of practitioners, new gallerists, collecting communities that over the last years have started bubbling up, let's say on the periphery of the core institutional art world that we more traditionally represent, let's say. And I think it's inarguable. There's been a lot of excitement, a lot of activity coming out of that corner, but it's for the most part been off to the side while, the core institutional art world of galleries, museums, biennials, fairs, has marched in a certain direction on a whole. And 010 is really our acknowledgement that this is an evolving discussion, an evolving universe of things. And our great hope is that in introducing 010 across the platform, we can give visibility to a generation of artists who are actively practicing and increasingly. I just read, this morning, big preview piece on Rafik Anadol's Dataland Museum opening in LA. And it's really acknowledging that there is an incredibly important thing happening here. And I think if you were to take a directional bet on the future of artistic production, you can't not acknowledge that the way that artists and practitioners use digital, computer, and increasingly inevitably AI-generated and based technology to create work, but also not just to create work, but to inform the channels, distribution methods, and create touch points with new communities. That is a really important direction of travel. And critical in that journey, because I don't want to overstate the uniqueness of the thing itself. We've had media-based art, new media art, various forms of conceptual film, time-based media. No part of that is unique to the current moment. But what is increasingly also the distinctive of many of the artists and practitioners and galleries that are part of the 010 universe is that there is a highly dedicated community of collectors, buyers, sellers, as well as audiences that are looking to these types of artworks and aren't necessarily getting serviced in the core art market and art world context. And I think that's important. as a business as we look at where things are happening and where we can create touch points and modes of connectivity to new practitioners, new communities, to ensure that in the next years that we are meeting them where they are, so to speak. Because I think the risk in this fast evolving world, and we're seeing all sorts of institutions trying to figure this out in real time, is that if you don't meet that community in a genuine and proactive way, the risk is that it just passes you by. Also, on the other hand, there are a lot of artists that are strongly associated with galleries, museums, biennials, so on and so forth, that have been up till now speaking to a fairly insular community of the art world cognoscenti. And I think with 010, we're also aspiring to create bridges between these communities so that artists from, say, Ryoji Ikeda or Avery Singer, Vera Molnar, like artists that are part of our world. Hito Styrol is a great example that's going to be with us in Basel, that artists from that community have a through line and a touch point with practitioners and others from a different community, and that there's a cross-pollinating element. So in Basel itself, whereas Miami and Hong Kong were mostly digitally native artists and galleries, some degree in isolation, our goal in Basel was to lift it up, to work with Trevor and Eli to create these bridges more material. And Trevor is an artist strongly associated with straddling these worlds and just was honored at the Guggenheim earlier this spring with the LG Award. He's the recipient of a MacArthur grant, somebody that to us, I think, has really done more than almost anybody to advance discourse and dialogue and mutual understandings around this line. And so in Basel, we've assembled 20 projects bridging the Marion Goodmans and the Hausers of the world with Asprey Studios or Art Blocks and Fellowship and others that are only, either just coming to us anew in Basel or have only recently started participating in the Art Basel platform.
Right. No, that makes sense, because initially my understanding of this platform was it's kind of like what's happening in the digital culture. Let's bring it into the fold. But this, just looking at the list, I haven't seen anything yet, but it seems like almost like how are major galleries participating in this digital culture, because like it's suddenly hot. Obviously, that's where the heat was in Miami. And maybe that's just how things are evolving from that perspective. But of course, it would be very interesting to see how it actually plays out.
I was in the Bay Area earlier this year for the Node Foundation opening in Palo Alto, which is a really exciting new foundation focused on these types of practices. I think we're going to see more substantive new foundations and exhibition platforms emerge around all this. We mentioned Rafiq's Dataland Museum that's opening this spring as well. There's a moment happening.
It's interesting. You wrote about all of this in a way, not specifically about digital art, but you wrote in your book, The Art of the Deal, which was published 2011, so many years ago. And you were looking at the video art, at the experiential art, and how these non-traditional art forms are being collected and valued and institutionalized. But in a way, it seems like the digital art, where it is now, it kind of follows that same historical trajectory. But with other art forms, it took many, many years, like decades, to kind of come into the fold and to be accepted by the quote-unquote traditional art world and art market. I've heard people say that the digital art economy is a hard fork on the traditional art economy. And so it kind of follows its own rules. And so these museums and these institutions that some of them we just mentioned, they are coming up so quickly at the same time as the whole medium, right, is being evaluated. Those bridges are being created. It's all happening in real time.
Well, I think that speaks to the speed and the immediacy of much of the thing itself, right? You could look at earlier moments of conceptual or media-based art. You look at, artists' use of Xerox, the 60s and 70s, and the group around Seth Siegelau. Then using new technology, to question authorship, the hand of the artist, how works disseminate and get reproduced. But what you didn't have at the time was a whole community of buyers, collectors, and people coming around, say, Xerox in the same way that you're seeing now. Obviously, there was the huge hype and easing out, let's say, of the whole NFT bubble. But something's going to stick. And I think to get back to why we're doing this, I believe we have a duty as a leading institution, a leading voice in the market, to move a new terrain and to welcome new practitioners, new audiences, to continuously challenge ourselves and to continuously adjust our platform to meet new audiences increasingly where they are. And you could see on the ground in Miami, you saw again in Hong Kong, the excitement around a lot of this. The next phase is going to be responsibly building a sustainable market, creating bridges so that the artists that are more commonly associated with our institution, with museums, institutions, galleries, also benefit from these new structures and new audiences. But I think the potential is there. And it's not going to just be Art Basel doing this. There's going to be, an industry growing and consolidating around this. But as the person leading Art Basel, it was incredibly important to me to lead the field, certainly the field in the art fair space, and leaning in meaningfully and substantively here. And as this evolves, and it is by its nature an entrepreneurial new initiative, it's going to take different shapes and forms. As we looked at Basel specifically, we really felt the need to lift it up institutionally, to bring in artists, which was also a learning and working with YL into it with Trevor, and to create more bridges with the Avery Singers and the Hitos of the world and not just tell one side of the story.
I see that, but I could also see that sense of discovery and experimentation may be a little bit compromised. It could be just seen as, okay, just another section for a new media, as opposed to like a space for real discovery. Like that would be probably your challenge, like how to maintain that sense of discovery.
Absolutely. But the fun thing is, Katya, that we're building, right? And you're building, learning, innovating. And, what happens in Basel is going to inform our next go forward steps in doing this. What's most important to me is that we're doing this with integrity, we're doing it with a vision, and we're putting, our own brand behind something that we ultimately believe in and really trying to move and evolve the market. That's important because we sort of get back to your other question on the middle market, but more perhaps pointedly to that, sort of where we are in the ebb and flow and the evolution of the art market as a whole. And I think, as a student of history, we have to look back in time to the last major reset of the market, which is probably in the 90s, in terms of an extended period of a lot of challenges coming out of this moment in the 80s, where there was a lot of different period of speculation and consolidation and trading around works. And whether it was the downtown scene in New York up to this extraordinary speculative bubble around Impressionist art. But I come back to that moment a lot because that's also the moment that gave birth, as the 80s bubble bottomed out in the early 90s. That reset in the market opened a lens for many of the gallerists, artists, and practitioners that have really driven this latest expansion of the contemporary art market. That created a space for them to come into the frame. You had Matthew Barney, newly graduated from Yale, doing crazy performances with Barbara Gladstone that really queried trajectory of art making. You had Rick Tiravanija, in the early 90s, Jason Rhodes and others, all that became really synonymous with the generation and helped variously put, any number of galleries from Barbara Gladstone to 303 to David Warner and others on the map. And so I don't want to overstate the potentiality of 010 to do that. But one thing that's very exciting in the moment that we're currently living through, and that's always difficult in any cyclical or historic moment to see in the real, is the latent excitement around where artists will go as the world is evolving and changing. And I hold that as an incredibly important and exciting element and subcurrent of the current market that hopefully can also inform direction of travel for our platform and the broader trade.
Well, let's quickly jump to the other through line, and it's important to the evolution of Art Basel, I think, is the evolution of your clients who are galleries, right? And so while Art Basel is growing and expanding and now has 5 locations, inarguably the strongest art fair brand in the world, but a lot of your clients, a lot of galleries, a lot of exhibitors are really hurting, and putting such pressure, especially on the mid-tier galleries, because, the big galleries, as expensive as it is, as the booth size, the shipping is, they're selling multi-million dollar works and they can pay for it. They can survive. The little guys, you actually are offering a lot of subsidies through different sections, right? Like Novo, statements, positions, etc. So smaller galleries, newer galleries can breathe and participate and not go out of business. I do have to bring up somebody who we both very much admire, Claudia Altman-Siegel, gallery that we've known for years and years, who went out of business and who told me last year that one Art Basel in Miami miscalculation on her part really led to this downward spiral that ultimately made her decide not to continue. And it resonated with a lot of galleries, and it really is like a serious, serious problem and a challenge because what do you do? Because it is your responsibility, like you said, to point the next direction, right? But this is also very, very pivotal for your community. So, what is like? I'm sure you think about it a lot. Like, have you come up with a solution for mid-tier, mid-sized galleries to do these fairs in a way that doesn't risk their existence? I'm hearing from people who, July is not far. People are signing up for Miami. Will another batch of European galleries not going? It's all very relevant. What is your thinking about this mid-size, mid-space gallery? And is there a way Art Basel can responsibly alleviate that pressure somehow?
The number one way we can alleviate that pressure, Katya, is by delivering audience, clients to those galleries through our platform and drive sales and new leads and new clients to them. And so that is why, as a global platform, we are so focused on creating the best possible experience on site at the shows and working assiduously 365, 24/7 with our various teams to ensure that the market is turning up at our shows and that those galleries are interfacing with clients they know, with new clients as best as possible. Concurrent with that, we implemented our sliding scale pricing some years ago, pre-COVID, anticipating already any gallery that participates in our fair, depending on the size booth you have, benefits from that. We shifted from a model in which everybody was paying the exact same price per square meter. So that allows galleries to fine tune, adjust. We work with them on their placement within the fair to create maximum impact. But what we've tried to deploy, and certainly done so more than any other player in the art fair landscape, is to work hand in hand with them to moderate and adjust some of that pricing. So some of it's really on the operational cost. The reality is that the fundamental commitment we have to our gallery clients in an art industry complex that's changing. I go to Chelsea today, I go to the West End in London, I go to Midtown. Consumption has also changed on a day-to-day in the bricks and mortar space in terms of how people are consuming art, how they're seeing art, where people are going. One thing we know to be true is that audiences are coming to and very focused on buying at and attending the fairs that we put on, and our first and foremost commitment to galleries, from the newest galleries that are coming into the platform to the mid-market, which is, as you said, facing a number of challenges as some of their artists were getting picked off by bigger galleries and so on and so forth.
It's not the same, just that the pricing is a lot lower than pricing of mega galleries, and they could be next to them. And it's like they don't have the same sales force, they don't have the same pricing. So to charge them the same per square foot just seems a little bit unfair.
Yes, Katya, we don't necessarily charge that the same per square foot. It depends on how much space one is taking, right? So that's fundamental. And then again, it's really about driving those participations and attendance. So we do everything we can to bring an audience to these galleries and to then help manage the cost and the overall impact and value of their investment.
But beyond that, it's just kind of tough. It seems like in some cases, the calculus just doesn't work for them.
I think it's a challenge for everybody, in the industry right now. The biggest challenge, Katya, is that we, as an industry, the cost base for everybody, for producers, for people renting bricks and mortar space, participating in the fair ecosystem has gone up as the market has gone sideways. If you look at global sales in the art market over the last decade, sales, although they came up last year, are still somewhat below where they were in the 2018, 2019 period. And at the same time, the cost of putting your lights on in your gallery, of rent, of shipping, of insuring has gone up. So galleries have had to, as have other market participants, been more selective about where they appear. Also, frankly, be more thoughtful about the type of art they show, who they're presenting, who they're selling to. And, I think as ever, the market rewards those that are the most intentional, the most thoughtful, that are really doing the hard work. It's an evolving and shifting dynamic in the industry at the moment.
Right. It's a very difficult time. With Art Basel, though, you guys have resisted for a while, like to really expand dramatically, right? And then in the last couple of years, you've added Paris and Qatar most recently. So are you kind of envisioning a larger global network over the next decade, or is this 4 or 5 fairs is where you're going to stay for a little while?
I mean, look, I can't comment on future plans. Like, we've added 2 fairs in the last 5 years. We have introduced 010, which is around new content, new audiences. As discussed, we introduced a year ago the Art Basel Awards platform, which, will be coming through Basel as well next week.
Is it a money-making thing?
We don't ever comment, Concha, on the commercial structure of our business, but Hugo Boss is the lead partner of that. We reinvest back into the awardees themselves, into the winners of the various categories, distributing cash grants as well as commissions. Ibrahim Mahama and Naomi Bagrami, and we'll have 2 extraordinary commissions that came through that project in Basel, Switzerland next week. So it's really about supporting the ecosystem, recognizing not just the superstar artists, but the artists merging in mid-career levels, but also the patrons, the practitioners, the ecosystem that makes it all possible. And so, I think that speaks to how we're looking at our brand and position in the market. In an earlier moment, it may have been the case that one would just say, we'll expand, and keep adding fairs. I don't think that that's conducive without a larger strategy to nurture and support the ecosystem. And, that's a big part of what we're focused on, is we're also focused on building out the rest of our media and content platform, creating greater and more important touch points with collecting and institutional communities in different markets, and so on and so forth. So I'll stop short of saying that our next move is just to add a new fair. I think in a changing and evolving market, that really needs an institution like Art Basel to lean in and ensure that the wheels, so to speak, are continuously moving to support galleries and artists of all shapes and stripes at all parts of the market. Our greatest focus is on ultimately serving those audiences and ensuring that Art Basel, as far as we can see, remains the most important market platform of its kind, and really, the place to be for communities that are looking at discovering and entering the market. And one thing we haven't discussed up till now is just how collecting itself is evolving and changing. And I think we're seeing some pretty substantive changes there as well, in terms of generational transfer, the look, feel, and whatnot of tomorrow's patrons. And, we must ensure that Art Basel remains a place that they feel at home, welcomed, and ultimately serviced. And in doing so, the great goal is to have those audiences then flowing through our platform, supporting the galleries and artists that are at Art Basel through our fairs, but also then going to their places of business and discovering and taking interest in the work that they're showing on a year-round basis.
I mean, the thing is, in Miami, for example, I always notice that there's so many really, really old people, and very nicely they have these little mobiles, and they're all driving in the mobiles through the aisles. But it's a very aging population, and sort of cultivating the next gen. Like, obviously, it's the big, big, big challenge for the whole industry. But what's the proportion, like age wise, of people in their 40s and younger, or versus like older population? Do you have any of this by any chance?
We have a great understanding of our audience without going into details. Look, on a whole, Katya, we're seeing a lot of new people showing up across the platform. They are, on a whole, younger They're more self-made, they're more female, and they're from further and further afield outside of the conventional, say, New York, London, Paris axis. Of course, there are many as well, but it's a world and an industry in evolution right now. And that's what, for us, is so exciting. And we see this at each of the shows and each of the fairs that we host. We see a significant number, and we're not making them up out of the blue. These are the clients that are getting nominated by our galleries, by advisors that are coming to the platform, bringing clients with them. And, a new audience is turning up. And I think that that's, for Art Basel, for our galleries, for the industry as a whole, super exciting. One of the challenges in that, and here, I can speak to our responsibility and what our duty must be, is that as costs have risen, we're also seeing, and we talked about this quite a bit, the publishing of this year's art market report, something of a K-shaped recovery coming into place. So you're seeing concentration of buying really high end again, which has helped lift up the market, but also, newer entrants that are entering and beginning to buy, but buying at lower levels. And so one of the more interesting statistics that we saw in the latest edition of the art market report was, around the number of unique buyers by gallery turnover. And for the largest galleries that did 10 million plus of turnover, those unique buyers grew by 50% in the period from 2019 to 2025. And yet sales in the market were down slightly. And I think that gives an indication of some of the challenges and growing pains that the industry as a whole is going through at the moment, in which the trade and galleries and dealers are having to service a wider number of unique clients and work harder and harder in getting to know and follow their interests and build those relationships. And yet that's, yielding different returns that it may have done historically. And so our duty as Art Basel is to ensure that as those new buyers are turning up across our platform, that they are well connected to and ultimately getting in front in a meaningful way of those galleries, especially the younger and the mid-market galleries who, you correctly point out, have less professional admin, let's say, necessarily to be able to do that. But that's a service that we have to provide.
Right. You're about to jump into this onslaught marathon of a few days. You have to be everywhere. How do you do it? I always wonder, because I see you everywhere. Everywhere I go and everywhere I don't go, I know you're there too. So I was just wondering, how do you do it? Do you have a hard stop during the day? Do you swim in the Rhine?
Try to be as healthy as possible, Katya. We've started doing a lot of runs and jogs on the Rhine, which I've done for years, but really staying switched on, healthy focus throughout these weeks. It's a slog, but it's exciting. And it's also what we in the industry are so excited about, is just the energy around these fair weeks, none more so than Basel, where the world really turns up. And I think the adrenaline from that, at least up till now in my career, has kept me and others on our feet.
What time do you go to bed?
Somewhere between 11 o'clock and a little after midnight.
Really? Oh, wow. What time do you get up?
I'm up usually at around 6.
We managed to stick to the same schedule.
I try my best. For the last few years, a few of us have started doing a half marathon as well on the Sunday out to Rhine and back, and then for a swim, which has been pretty fun. So if any of your listeners want to join me for that, we'll be leaving early Sunday morning.
The last day of the fair, where are you meeting?
We'll pick a place on the Rhine. Let's say in front of the Trois. Why not start there?
And what time?
Let's call it 7:30 in the morning.
Amazing. So half a marathon and then plunge into the Rhine.
That's the plan. Anybody can come.
All right. I love it. Noah, thank you so much for your time and insight, and have a wonderful fair. Good luck.
Thank you, Katya.
The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili with contributions from Ben Davis and Caroline Goldstein. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.